Welcome to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps, a bi-weekly podcast with me, Dr. Kish Cumi Price. Hello, and welcome back to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps. I am Dr. Kish Cumi Price, and I think it has been a really interesting journey sharing information with you all about the impact of bullies, wimps, and poverty pimps. And for today, we will break down a little bit more the why. Why does it even matter for us to be talking about bullies, wimps, and poverty pimps and the impact that they have on systems and specifically marginalized communities? So just to give kind of a brief recap, we talked a lot about the bullies initially and how bullies show up. And I think a lot of times, when people think of the term bullies, you're typically thinking about immature behavior. You're thinking about kids. You're thinking about bullying in schools. But what happens to the bullies, that were in school, right? That never learned how to function without using that kind of behavior. They're still out here, right? They end up occupying and sharing space with you in different ways. They are leading organizations. They are impacting systems in ways that you never would have imagined, right? And because that is the case, we have to be aware that that's what we're dealing with, and we have to be able to label it as such. When bullies show up, that we're able to call out that kind of behavior, right? So that was the first leg of this stool. Then we talked about poverty pimps. We skipped over the wimps and talked about poverty pimps a little bit and gave context around the involvement of poverty pimps in these systems that are continuously not serving people well, specifically people in marginalized communities. And in talking about poverty pimps, I think it became very apparent that although there is a mission and an agenda to profit off of marginalized communities for those poverty pimps, whether that's individually or for some collective purpose, that the goal is never to serve the community. It may be to look like you're doing that, but it's never that. So I know we could have gone a lot deeper into poverty pimps, but I think we gave a good idea, of the why they matter. So then we talked a little bit about wimps, and I think, well, actually, we spent quite a deal of time talking about wimps, and because I actually believe that more people relate to either seeing wimp behavior or actually identify as wimps. You probably would have never called yourself that before, but if you really think back on your actions and how you showed up or didn't show up, you probably can identify with being a wimp at some point in your life, if not even now, in this current state, right? But I think in order for us to really get the big picture of how all of these roles, people in these roles come to play and how it ends up playing out in our day-to-day life is important. And so you have to understand the characters that show up. You have to understand what it looks like so that you don't end up inadvertently stepping into one of these roles when you never intended to do so. Or even if you did, that you can kind of check your actions and think twice about the impact. So anyway, I hope that was enough of a recap to kind of help situate the conversation that we're going to have today, which is about the impact of these bullies, wimps, and poverty pimps on systems and specifically marginalized communities. So I want to start with a system that I think is very important, specifically education system. the education system. And I will give a personal story of seeing this play out in a way that most wouldn't think, right? Like if I was going to tell a story about bullies in schools, you'd probably think I'd be talking about kids. Well, no, I'm talking about adults. And I was actually interning at a school after serving as a school counselor, interning for my doctoral program. And I witnessed teachers provoking students that they know had a discipline record with the school, right? These are students that had been either suspended or, had some kind of prior issue conduct wise. They weren't having one that day and in that moment, but it was very obvious that this particular teacher that I witnessed had a goal of trying to provoke this student. He was saying all kinds of, inappropriate things, trying to get a reaction out of the student. The student was doing a really good job of, trying to ignore the behavior, but the teacher continued to try to get him to react. And I mean, it was so ridiculous to witness that, I ended up saying something about it, of course, in the moment, but then felt I needed to report him as well because it was just inappropriate, and I'm thinking at first I thought he was joking, right? Uh, some of the teachers had relationships with students in that way, so I was waiting for him to say that he was joking or no. And I could tell from the student's reaction that he wasn't receiving it as a joke either. So um, I don't know why that was so disturbing to me because I mean, it's not to say that it was isolated because I witnessed that that was somewhat the culture in that school, right? I witnessed another teacher do the same thing. But my point is, it really doesn't matter which system we're talking about, where we are. People show up in ways that are really not serving their role that they were hired for well, right? Not serving the people that they were hired to serve well. And in that instance, right, that teacher is using their power, their authority as a teacher to try to get a response out of a student that would then require them not to have to interact with that student in their class. I think that was the overall goal. I didn't, you know, get that confirmed from that teacher, but that seemed like that was the point as this altercation happened in the hallway before the class began. But anyway, the point that I'm making for sharing this in particular is that these instances that we witness or that we are participants of, even, we can't really turn away from them and pretend that they're not happening. That's where the wimps come in, right? Those are the people who say, it's not my business. I don't know what's going on here. This isn't my classroom. This isn't my student. And you just walk on by. Why? Why does it even matter, right? And I know, what I'm going to say too, I'm going to put a pin here because I sense that there may be people who are kind of in this place. And I think I mentioned it in another episode about snitching, right? Where is you have a very, very, very visceral reaction to what seems to be snitching, right? So if I say something about this, then that's like I'm snitching, and snitches end up in ditches, and all the things that you've been indoctrinated with that really keeps you from operating in courage and actually feeding the system, if you will. we have to understand that there is a way to operate in wisdom, and that advocating for someone and protecting those that can't protect themselves is never about snitching. It's about righting wrongs. It's about calling out bad actors. It's about stopping abuse. If we're being real, it's about stopping abuse and misuse of power. Okay. So that's just one element, but you probably know about, the school to prison pipeline that so many have experienced being the victims of, specifically in the Black community. It's another way of recognizing the effects of bullying in the academic setting, in an educational setting, right? This goal of pushing out Black and brown youth out of schools, targeting them essentially. It is still to this day, after so many years of calling this out and doing research, which is actually one of my areas of research, and knowing very intimately, also from personal experience with family, that this happens too regularly, right? That there's this desire to label Black and brown youth. A lot of times it's about Black and brown males, but females are not in any way discounted from this disparity, right? That we see Black and brown youth subjected to horrible treatment in schools, with the end goal of pushing them out of the school and inevitably into the justice system, right? So we have we have to quit pretending that things aren't what they are. And I do believe that as much as we say we want to stop certain things from happening, like the school to prison pipeline, one of the ways that that can be done in a very real way is calling out the bad actors, right? There are people that you see every day in schools that are taking it to the next level. They're trying to get reactions out of kids so that they can not have to deal with them because that particular child needs extra support and they don't want to provide the extra. They're just tired of dealing with them, and they're like, I'd be better off. My day would be better for you not to be here, right? That's happening. You see your colleagues, you may be one of them, right? That's just like, I don't feel like dealing with this kid. However, your actions or inactions speak to the reason why we see this chain reaction of Black and brown youth being pushed out of schools, dropping out, or not being able to be successful in the educational system, funneled into prison systems, being in a place where they are not able to be present for their families, which then leads to even more of the same, right? That's the cycle that you are essentially signing on to support, right? You're complicit with this cycle being effective because you're not doing anything to interrupt it, right? When you can. And so that's what I know. I spend a little bit of time on that one because it's really true to my heart and annoyance with where we are as a society. The other system that I wanted to talk a little bit about is the healthcare system. And we often kind of superficially glaze over access issues with healthcare and sometimes even ignore the racial implications of what that looks like. And I believe that we are in a time where we should understand that poverty pimps may be even more encouraged to exploit gaps in healthcare access based on race and specifically targeting marginalized communities, right? And you're probably wondering what that looks like. And a lot of times it has to do with the quality of care. It has to do with treating symptoms instead of getting to the root of healthcare issues. It has to do with not providing the kind of support and resources that are needed to actually live a healthy life. It has to do with the lack of healthy foods in marginalized communities that then lead to sickness and disease in increased measure. It has to do with the desire to really wipe away groups of people. And I know that may seem extreme to some to understand, but it's our lived reality. And I know I'm talking to a global audience, so this applies across the globe, that there are efforts underway to target communities, specifically communities of color, so that there's a lack of healthy individuals that thrive. So, and that I could go into many of the layers there, but I just want us to understand why this conversation, this discussion, this journey that we've been on matters within the systems that impact our daily lives. The next one that I wanted to hit on for today, anyway, is the criminal justice system. And I know we talked a little bit about it when I was talking about the educational system and the school to prison pipeline. However, specifically, wanted to talk about the disproportionate targeting and incarceration of marginalized individuals, which really has to do with biases, right? And I know there have been so many efforts to try to properly train and to make amendments to policies and things that seem to be low hanging fruit to provide solutions, right? Maybe the reason why this is happening is because people don't know about it. They don't have words to use. They don't have the language. Maybe this is happening because they've been inappropriately trained. Maybe it's happening because of historical racism that continues to be very prominent in our culture. Maybe this has to do with uh, bullies who have taken positions that are supposed to be to protect and to serve, and they're using it as their opportunity to abuse power, right? So it's a both and, yes and situation here in regard to those elements that I just mentioned. It's a collection of problems. And when we're talking about the justice system, it is very difficult to reckon with the notion that these disparities exist and then that there's very little that's being done to rectify the issues, right? In plural. It's even more difficult to witness the treatment of individuals and know that the same act could have been carried out by both a member of society that identifies as white and a member of society that identifies as not white, and that they're going to receive different treatment based on that. specifically when we're looking in America anyway, between white and black individuals and what that looks like. And then when we put in the gender, sex recognition, it's even more glaring when you look at the differences in treatment, right? Like, we're not talking about, okay, this is what happens when you commit this crime. Regardless, across the board, this is the treatment. You get this amount of time, you have these opportunities, and then this is what it looks like on the backside. But that's not what we're talking about. That's why we say disparities, because what we see, specifically in America, and of course in other places across the globe, we see differences in treatment, significant differences in treatment based on race, based on gender. Okay. And because of that, we have to understand that there's so many ways that we can show up for each other. Why is it important? Because you may be saying, does not even impact me, right? I've never committed a crime, or I've never been convicted of a crime. I've never served time. I don't know anybody who served time. Like, this is so far removed from me. Well, here's the problem. It can absolutely be you at any point. It can be your child. It can be your friend. Okay. And at that point in time, now you do care, right? You are heightened. Your senses are heightened toward what's happening. How are people being treated? Because you're now one of those people, or your child or your loved one is now one of those people, right? And so I just ask you to really do the work of not just standing for something that you have experienced, but just stand for justice, period, right? Like, if you are in the legal system, if you are, um, you know, a part of some kind of uh, proceeding where, like, be in a place where you can show up authentically, that you are not weaponizing the power that you have to show up in truth, that you're not standing for somebody instead of standing for justice, right? Like, and I know it's difficult. It's very, very difficult when you care about somebody and you're trying to show loyalty or protect them or be there for them, whatever it may be. The way that we show up for each other really is in our authenticity. We show up for each other in truth. Okay. So this is a big deal because I think we have the opportunity in ways that we may not even know to do this. And it may be in your profession, depending on what your line of work is. I know I mentioned legal proceedings, whether you're an attorney, whether you're um, a judge, whether you're a clerk, whatever it is that you paralegal, whatever way that you show up in a space, that you are doing your work with a moral compass, and that you understand that the work that you do, although you may think that you're just being judged by a supervisor that may be asking you to do something that's unethical, ultimately we're all going to be judged. That's my belief. I know everybody doesn't believe what I believe, but ultimately we will all be judged. And so you will be judged on your actions and inactions. We talk about that quite a bit on this podcast. So just keep that in mind as you go forth, that you are always in a place where you can look yourself in the mirror and feel good about who you are and what you have done as you've walked this earth. What you've said, what you didn't say, what you've seen, what you haven't seen, how you've stood up how you move back when you needed to, right? All of these things matter and can have a great impact on how we do life with each other. The other piece that I wanted to get into a little bit, and we'll go ahead and wrap up, is just about the ways in which bullies, wimps, and poverty pimps have negatively impacted communities, specifically communities of color and communities where people identify marginalized populations in whatever way that uh, shows up. And so I think that, we sometimes try to assume that it is what it is, right? Like you can have that mentality at some point where you kind of check out. And I'm going to be honest, I know I've been very much, uh, I don't know, like toying with that notion of just almost like, I guess I would call it a loss of hope. You just kind of get to the point where you're just like, these people are ridiculous and they're going to stay ridiculous. Like, you feel like you're taking, especially in the work of advocacy and moving toward equity, right? And advocating for marginalized populations, that it feels like you're like, okay, that 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing, or 2 steps forward, 4 steps back is where I kind of feel like we are now, right? And it can become disheartening. It can become deflating and depressing and all the things, and you really feel like, well, what is the point? Like, what am I doing? Why are we even doing what we're doing? Does it even matter? And here's what I want to say to encourage you to keep true to the fight, is that even if it feels like it doesn't matter and it's not making a difference, it absolutely is making a difference in the kingdom, like the big picture, okay? The bigger picture, right? Even though your goal may be focused on this one population or this one community, think beyond that, right? Think of the little interactions that you're having with people on a daily basis, whether it's for the people that you're advocating on behalf of or the people that you're advocating to. Your presence is forcing a path for resilience, is forcing a path for something different. Okay. And if you weren't there, standing in the gap, standing for the cause, pushing back on what's pushing toward you to crush you and everybody behind you, then what? Right? It would be devastating to think that you could be doing something and you're not. That's even worse. Right. So I know, trust me, I understand the feeling of feeling, just burdened and discouraged, right? That it's just like, well, what's the point? If every time we get just a sense of relief, we're knocked down again, or we feel like we can't move on, what's the point? Well, the little victories that you have, you may not even sense in the moment that they're victories, but the impact of that is a resounding boom in the atmosphere that you may not even know is happening, right? Like the other people that you're influencing, the other people that you're inspiring and encouraging, right? To join you in the cause, to join you in helping to make this world better for everybody. Okay. So stay with it. I know it's tough. I know it's not rewarding work. Do trust. I know that. But it is worth it in the end. And as I said, I know I have to keep bringing this back to who I am and why I'm here. I believe that we all will have to answer to God one day. And regardless of if you got a medal or an award or a trophy or special recognition, or a gala thrown on your behalf, whatever. It really doesn't matter what happens here on this earth. If you can get before God and He can say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," because you carried out your mission, your assignment, you stood when you needed to stand, you sat down when you needed to sit down, you spoke out when you needed to speak, you kept your mouth quiet when you needed to be quiet for the sake of the good. That's what it's about. So I know it's tough because we are a generation, a society that wants instant gratification, right? We want that. We want to be affirmed. We want to know that somebody's listening. We want to know, I can be completely honest with you right now. I would really, it's strange to have these conversations, discussions, and release these episodes, have no idea who's listening, have no idea if it's helping anybody or not, but feeling extremely called to do it anyway. And I've struggled with this last episode because of that, right? Because I'm just like, man, it has felt like a lifetime of work that has, for me personally, feels like it's just rolled back years, where you were starting to gain hope and optimism for things, for change. And it feels like we are in a world that just is so resistant to it, right? Resistant to supporting everybody, helping everybody to not only survive but to thrive. Like that's what it's been about for me. And I know so many others that are in this work. And so I just I just ask you to keep on keeping on. And I know it's tough. It is. And I know that you may feel like you've gotten the wind knocked out of you multiple times in your journey, right? Because it is tough daily showing up to fight against the tides, right? Like to actually not roll with it, but push back against it. And so I encourage you to take time to be well. And I know that's kind of a shift from what we were talking about, but you got to take care of you. Get to a good place so that you can continue to do the work that you do and do it well, and be strong enough to call out what needs to be called out, to call out the bullies, the wimps, and the poverty pimps, and not to fold and become one of them. So, thank you for listening. I believe our next episode, we're going to be joined by one of my mentors to talk about something that I think is really, really important. And I'm not going to share exactly what it is because I think is necessary to kind of let that breathe a little bit. But I want you all to take care of yourselves in the meantime. And I will be back with you all in a couple of weeks, maybe 3 because of the holidays, but it'll be worth it. So join us next time. I hope this blessed you. I hope you got something out of it. And in the meantime, be bold, be courageous, be unpimped.